This is Management 1600, Chapter 8, Global Management. One of the things that we just need to make very clear is this is not going to replace like an international MBA that you can get at, like some schools just focus on teaching international business. The purpose of this chapter, and the little that we're going to go over this chapter, is just to introduce you as a student to some of the terms and some of the ideas, concepts that are incorporated with this idea of global management and global business. And very simply, global business is the buying and selling of goods and services by people from different countries. So you don't even have to have a presence in another country. I mean, you don't even have to have employees in another country. You can outsource the buying and selling of goods to other people in other countries, goods that you're producing or that you're managing, and that is a global business. One of the problems with global management or doing business globally is countries like to protect certain industries within their borders. So governments have actively used trade barriers to make it more expensive or even difficult, maybe even impossible for consumers to buy or consume imported goods. The first trade barrier we're going to talk about is quotas. These are a limited number or a limited volume of imported goods. For example, China has an annual limit of 20 foreign films that are allowed to be released in Chinese movie theaters. Like quotas, voluntary export restraints limit the amount of product that can be exported annually. The difference is that the exporting country, rather than the importing country, imposes these restraints. Most of the time, this happens in an agreement. Hey, we won't flood your country with this, or we'll only allow this much to go to your country. In return, please make sure that this happens for us. Another one is government import standards. These are established to protect the health and safety of citizens. In reality, such standards are often used to restrict or ban imported goods. One of the standards that recently seen is honey. Honey has a certain grade or standard before it can be sold or used in the United States. And honey is used in a lot of things, especially in our cereals. In China, they have a method of harvesting honey where they harvest it early so the bees will produce more. And this produces a lower grade of honey, as you can imagine. Different color, a little bit different taste. This one company that was an importer out of Chicago was importing honey from China, and they took it and sent it to Taiwan first, had the people in Taiwan relabel it, add coloring, add sugar, stir it up, and then ship it on as Taiwanese honey to the U.S. When it became found out that these guys were doing this, a lot of people, lots of fines, a lot of people went to jail. We're very serious about our import standards. We also use subsidies. These are long-term, low-interest loans, cash grants, or tax deferments. We use these to develop and protect companies in special industries. You can think of the farming subsidies that we have. We want to keep farmers farming, and we want to make sure that they have a profitable return for whatever they're doing. That makes it harder, so it's cheaper, it's easier for them to farm. It means that they can sell their food for less money, and it's harder for other people to come in and compete in that market. There's a type of non-tariff which is called a custom classification. Now, a custom classification, what happens in a classification is we have these custom agents that will go through something that's being imported into a country and examine it to decide into which of 9,000 categories it should be classified. And according to that classification, they're subject to taxes, the import tax, to a quota, to one of these standards, one of these other tariff barriers that we have, making that decision at points critical. One of the problems with this is that these people are you can bribe these custom agents to classify your product in a certain way, so it's a lot cheaper for your company to do business. Interestingly enough, tariffs are not good for our standard of living. We know that the less trade barriers, the better. So what we do after we raise our tariffs, we made trade agreements with various countries. One of the biggest and earliest trade agreements that was made was this GATT agreement. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade existed from 1947 to 1995. There was 120 countries, and the idea was to substantially reduce tariffs and other trade barriers or eliminate the tariffs altogether.
In 1992, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom implemented the Maastricht Treaty of Europe. The purpose of this treaty was to transform their 12 different economies and 12 currencies into one common economic market, called the European Union, EU, with one common currency. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, went into effect on January 1, 1994. CAFTADR, the Central America Free Trade Agreement between the United States, the Dominican Republic, and the Central American countries of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, went into effect in August 2005. On May 23, 2008, 12 South American countries signed a treaty to form the Union of South American Nations, UNASIA, which united the former Mercosur, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela, and Andean Community, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, alliances with Guyana, Suriname, and Chile. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, are the two largest and most important regional trading groups in Asia. ASEAN is a trade agreement between Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, which form a market of more than 575 million people. APEC is a broader agreement that includes Australia, Canada, Chile, the People's Republic of China, Hong Kong, China, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Peru, Russia, South Korea, Taiwan, the United States, and all the members of ASEAN except Cambodia, Laos PDR, and Myanmar.
This map is just nice because it gives you a good idea of where these trade agreements actually, what area actually was covered by each of these trade agreements. So I thought I'd leave it in here for you. This might be a dumb slide, but I mean, it's worth going over. Trade agreements increase choices, competition, and purchase power, and they generally decrease prices. Free trade agreements create new business opportunities, but they also intensify competition. And that's one of the things we're finding right now in our situation. We have the U.S. economy, but the U.S. economy is now so integrated with the rest of the world that when Greece has problems, our stock market, at least our stock market, feels it. And it also means that our businesses can compete in the United States, but they compete against other businesses all over the world. So it's a really interesting dynamic, more dynamic economy now that we're a lot more global. When we look at going global and working in a global environment, if we take our business and say start a shop in Germany, how do we want to do that? Well, we have a business model that's worked in the United States. Will it work in Germany? If we think it will, if the business model is sound regardless of the culture or the economic environment, then we want to follow a strategy of global consistency. So this is when a multinational company has offices, plants, in different countries and runs them all using the same rules, guidelines, policies, and procedures. Now, this might be difficult when we have a company in the United States where we say we don't bribe people, and then we try to move that company and use some of the resources in India, where bribery is a way of life. So at times it can be very tricky to be globally consistent. Local adaptation is when a company modifies however it's doing business to adapt to the new environment. So in McDonald's, most McDonald's that you see in the United States, it's the same McDonald's almost anywhere you go. Big Mac tastes like a Big Mac, tastes like a Big Mac. That's actually true all over the globe. You buy a Big Mac in Germany, it's going to taste like a Big Mac from the United States. But they also do things differently in Germany. They have a different food selection. I remember going to a McDonald's in the Netherlands, and their dollar menu had this, something I'd never heard of. I ordered it because I'm cheap and adventurous, and it really tasted like fish meatloaf. I only had a bite. Well, actually, I had a bite and thought, that's terrible. And I was like, is it really that terrible? And then I had another bite. Yeah, it was. So we do have a mixture in McDonald's of local adaptation. Same with Coke. That's why we'll buy Coke from Mexico, because they don't use corn syrup, they use real sugar. So some people like that local adaptation. Okay, well, countries have traditionally a certain way of going global. Companies generally follow the phase model of globalization, in which a company makes transitions from a domestic company to a global company in the following sequence of phases: exporting, cooperative contracts, strategic alliances, and wholly owned affiliates. Exporting. Exporting is selling domestically made products to a foreign market. There's two main advantages. It makes a company less dependent on domestic sales. I said before, if things go crazy here in the US, at least we have sales in other countries to keep our income. Gives company more control, so we don't rely on foreign entities to represent us. We represent ourselves. We just send our products over the seas or across the border. Disadvantages: we're subject to trade barriers, and there's transportation costs. Another way we can do business globally is just licensing our stuff. In other words, we have a product that has brand recognition, and we allow another company or another manufacturing in a foreign market to license that product from us. So they have the rights, because of that license, to use our brand name and sell our products and actually produce our products under certain quality regulations, right? Advantages: the company earns money through these licensing agreements without investing a lot more money. And we avoid trade barriers because we're licensing to a company that's owned by someone or is a legal entity of another country. One of the disadvantages is we give up a lot of quality control, and this can be problematic. We can actually hurt our brand image overseas because of it. And licensees can actually then become competitors. They can steal our knowledge, our patents, and especially in China when patent laws aren't very strict, especially when they're American patents. So there's some problems with licensing, but in general, it's a fairly easy way to make a business or have a global reach with a business. I'm honestly not a big fan of franchising overseas, though I know it works. McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pizza Hut have done really well at franchising things overseas. Advantages: it's a fast way to enter a foreign market. It gives a franchisor additional cash flow. But the disadvantages are the loss of control, and then there's this culture mix that might not be very favorable. I'm just thinking about the fish meatloaf sandwiches that I ate. Another thing that we can do is create a strategic alliance. This is when companies combine key resources, costs, risks, technology, and people. Yeah. The most common form is a joint venture. One of the things that reminds me of a strategic alliance is the alliance that Tesla's had with Toyota in developing some of their hybrid technology and using it in the RAV4. There's a lot of advantages to this. The companies avoid trade barriers. Companies only bear the cost or part of the cost, and partners can learn a lot from each other. So they recognize that this Toyota and Tesla, that this was a way for both of them to learn from each other and help each other in improving their hybrid technology. The disadvantages: the profits have to be shared, and sometimes it just doesn't work very well. Sometimes we have cultural conflicts between the two companies. The last strategy is a wholly owned affiliate. Foreign offices, facilities, and manufacturing plants are 100% owned by the parent company. The advantages: parent company receives all the profits and has complete control. Disadvantages: losses for parent company can be enormous, especially when they're getting into working in a country that they're not very familiar with, they're not familiar with the customs, the cultures, all that. So it can be crazy. They can also be nationalized, and that's one of the things that happened with Exxon in Argentina. Exxon had a lot of facilities and investment in Argentina. Argentina came in and nationalized it. Exxon actually sued Argentina for $5 billion or $7 billion, some huge amount. And Argentina fought the suit and seemingly won, and only had to pay Exxon $1 billion instead of the 5 or 7. But so for Exxon, that's a $4 billion loss. And that's mind-blowing to me. Okay, so when we're looking at which markets we want to get into, one of the things that we look at is what is the purchasing power of the populace in that country. So purchasing power is measured by comparing the relative cost of the standard set of goods and services in different countries. Consequently, countries with high levels of purchasing power are good choices for companies looking for attractive global markets. In other words, the people in that market have money to buy your goods and services if they have a high level of purchase power. The second thing we look at is that there's growth potential in that market. They might have a lot of purchasing power, but if that's diminishing, then perhaps that's not a country we want to invest in. Just to end this, this chapter, I wanted to show this. This is recent information that The Economist posted. They're looking at the average person, how much they make with a degree, like a bachelor's degree, and we'll just say a bachelor's degree in business. So the average person with a bachelor's degree in business makes about $70,000. So what happens when you learn a different language? Well, we see that you get a bump for learning French. The average person with a bachelor's degree in business that's fluent in French makes an extra, it looks like $7,000 a year. But the same person with a proficiency in German makes, what is that? 55,000, an extra 55,000 a year. So it might be worth learning German. I might learn German and Chinese.